when you get to like a polished presentation, make sure you make some slides. Like these guys are super. So I made some slides, and then I see that, and then I'm completely blank. Yeah, it's a Sunday. Like you guys know it's a Sunday, right? You don't usually do these on a Sunday. Like that's a weekend. Like they teach weekends at schools. Anyway, so I'm thrilled to be here nonetheless, and thrilled to be introducing Chandra, the amazing Chandra. I'm from Think Wood, which some of you may know as the Southwood Lumber Board. Southwood Lumber Board is like the nonprofit organization, and then Think Wood is like our program. Raise your hands real quick if you have heard of us. Oh, nice. All right, cool. We are, or the education program is a relatively new concept for Think Wood. We started it when I started it, about 2 years or 2.5 years ago. So I'm pleased to know that our message is getting across. We are a nonprofit. We don't make wood. We don't sell wood. We're just doing education and we do training. Most of it is with practitioners, but we, like I'm saying, we started to branch out to talk to faculty and students, which is one of the reasons why we decided to sponsor AIAS. Before this, we did a small thing with South Hollywood where I but beyond that, it's been sort of a toe in the water. So I'm glad to be here and talking to you guys today. What we're trying to do essentially is help you guys shape the future of design and construction. That's really it. I mean, you guys know wood. You have a natural like of wood. I think you just get it, and I'll get to why I think you do. But really, I think I would just leave you with this one thought, which is just kind of be yourselves and remain yourselves as you go into practice. It's okay to make money. Those are all good things. It's okay to want nice things for yourselves and your family, but there is sort of a natural instinct that this generation seems to have towards biological materials, natural materials, and the feeling, their renewability, the fact that they are sort of produced in the US domestically, but all of that seems to, you kind of get it in a way that my generation and previous ones didn't. So if you take nothing away else than just this thought, like, my wish for you is just to hold on to whatever that is, whatever that feeling is, that is instinctually, I think it's very wise. What we do at the Soft Lumber Board and the Think Wood program is essentially we're trying to kind of instill more wood education at schools, right? So this was taken at Virginia Tech. We did a little traveling road tour where we introduced the idea of mass timber. We worked with a professor there to bring that sort of 2-day-long exhibition to the campus. And we've been doing that for a couple of years now, and always trying to hold small events like these at schools. Part of the reason why I think wood has sort of landed with your cohorts is that you're the first generation that's known only a planet that is in distress from climate change, and a market that has largely been in crisis in one way or another for a long time. We did a poll with you guys, essentially, said, hey, what are like what are the things that you most worry about and think about as you enter into practice? And you said, number one, overwhelmingly sustainability, and number two, affordability. And those are the same problems that we're trying to tackle in the wood products industry, right? We're trying to reinforce the idea and the fact that wood is the only renewable major building material, and the fact that it has a large role to play in sort of the solving of the housing problem, right? So denser housing, affordable housing, quicker to produce housing, and so forth, so that people have places to live. There are sort of two facts here, right? So whenever I go in front of a room like this, or the guy that usually comes out, when we go in front of a room like this and I say, hey, like you guys should think about wood and materiality, and they're like, yeah, but what about forests? Right? Like, we're doing to our forests? Should we leave forests untouched? And I'll leave you with sort of two facts, surprising facts. Deforestation in a global scale, totally a problem. Deforestation in, say, South America, illegal logging in, say, Russia, like totally a problem. In the US, we have reason to be very proud of our environmental heritage, right? So the kind of environmental movements that were strongly in place for, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, those people kind of went on to create laws and hold up standards that are in practice today. So in fact, we have been in a continuous growth of forest land for the last 50 years, net growth, right, in the US. The other fact that is surprising to most people is like what percentage of a forest is harvested in a given year, right? Most people think like, oh, maybe it's like 20%, 30%. It's actually 2%, right? So of all the forests that you're even allowed to log, only 2% of it is ever cut in a year. So we have a very robust, and we're lucky to have protections in place that protect that land, and we're very responsible about it. So keep asking questions about whether or not that fiber source is protected and whether it's sustainably harvested. That's totally a good check on the industry. But I'd like to say that the Americans have gotten this right. The United States has gotten this right in a way that a lot of the world hasn't. A couple of things that just programs that we have for the AAS students and in general. We do design competitions. So we have been doing these with ACSA for a while now. This is the 5th year, right? $40,000 to students and faculty for those that win, top 3 plus some honorable mentions. We do another one with CTBUH. That's an international competition. Last year, which was our first year doing it, University of Hawaii won first place. So that was $15,000. Those are in entry period now, so check them out, please. For faculty, any faculty in the room, we also do faculty development, right? So these are workshops that we've been holding throughout the country. We did 4 last year. We pay all expenses. You come and you learn how to teach wood design in your classrooms. Isn't that great? And so in closing, I just want to say, you guys are really kind of getting it in a way that hasn't needed to be taught, right? You understand sustainability. You've always grown up with this pressure, right? And I think you have kind of correctly identified wood as an element in the solution, right? Not the only solution, but an element in it. So I'd ask you to just kind of hold on to that, right? As you go into practice and as you're pressured and you're trying to make the best decisions that you can, right? Just keep studying, right? Keep coming to bodies like us to provide you information so that you can make safe, ethical decisions about the journeys. Okay. This is me. I put in this slide because I'm here. Contact me with any questions. We'll see you at the quads. We'll continue to sponsor more of these. So thank you for your time. Before you clap, I'm going to take myself off the screen. There we go. I'm here to introduce Chandra Robinson, principal at Lever Architecture, and really specialize in that. They're a firm based in Portland and LA, and they really specialize in design excellence, right? Especially innovation with mass timber, which is why we were happy to sponsor her speech today. Chandra really believes in creating beautiful spaces, obviously, right? But they're also accessible, they're expressive of the Pine values, and they're deeply equitable, right? She has a real amazing practice that protects that. She is currently also the vice chair of the Portland Design Commission, as well as a founding member and treasurer of the NOMA Portland chapter. It is my great pleasure to introduce Chandra Robinson.
Witness to all of your excitement. Being in school is a really special experience. School is hard, but it's really fun. And today I'm going to talk about a few things that are really about how practice is also really fun. So Lever Architecture is, like Simon said, it's in Portland, Oregon. We also have an office in LA. And also, like Simon said, a lot of things that we do in practice are because they're really important to us as people. And they're things that we loved when we were in school, like you, and we brought them into practice and been able to kind of still be ourselves and to really champion the things that are important to us. So these are our folks in our offices in Portland and LA, smaller group in LA, but we're really shaped by where we are and the people who make up our team, right? So in Oregon, obviously Oregon is timber country, and that's why we're so committed to timber as a resource for building materials. And we kind of think about timber as a way to really advance building technologies in a lot of different ways, right? You've seen mass timber as sort of a new thing to look at, but it's really fun. And actually, the colors don't come out on here as well as they should. But I'm going to talk about a bunch of different things. I may not hit all the things on this because I tend to just kind of veer here and there. But research and practice is really fun because there's a lot of work that we do that's around sustainability and around equity, and we're talking about open source design and details that we want to share, just like the ThinkWood program is really helping people teach other people how to design with wood, right? So there's a lot of cool things I'm going to share with you today, and I'm going to do that by just going through a bunch of our projects and kind of tell you what I think is important about those things. So one of the first major things that we did at Lever was work on a project called Framework, and it was the winner of a mass timber, a tall timber competition. There were a couple of winners, but we were awarded $1 million to do some research and testing in order to build a tall timber tower, right? So there were a lot of people who were part of this, and the money came from the government, USDA, and this process was actually what made the tall timber type 4 construction show up in the building code, so that we're able to actually build these things now. So through this process, what we did was, this is a 12-story tower. It's mass timber and has a timber rocking wall. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But this was affordable housing, which is also unusual. This was also meant to be right downtown in the Pearl District, which is a really sort of affluent neighborhood, but we need housing everywhere, and no housing is affordable, really. And so this was supposed to be really prominent and a really great example of what you can do. So there was a change in the administration that made it so that there were not any, there was a lot less money that was given to affordable housing projects, and so this didn't ultimately get built. But because it was designed for this competition and through the USDA, the design and the details were all open source, right? So that other folks could look at them and say, like, oh, this is an interesting way to do this, or this is an easy kind of mass timber detail to use. And they were able to use that and create new projects and build from there. So this was intended to also have sort of a mass timber education component inside of it to talk about this new technology and to talk very specifically about rocking walls. And so you'll see right there, Ascent, one of the recently completed tall timber towers, done in 2022. Framework was kind of in the middle of that, right? It wasn't super tall, but all of the details and things are what's used on other projects like Ascent to kind of go forward. So I think that's something that we're really excited about. We're excited to contribute to the industry by designing things and creating things that are open to share with everyone, because as we all kind of move towards the future, understanding technologies of different building materials and different ways of doing things and kind of sharing ideas is really important, right? There's a lot of proprietary design out in the world, but these things I feel really good about being open so that other people can use them, right? So this is the building structure. You'll see that it has a wood core, and often the core of the building is concrete and or steel. So the core, of course, is your standard elevator. And then you'll see the floor plates and all the beams and columns in there. What we really focused on in Framework was this mass timber post-tensioned rocking wall. So and it's because we're in an area that's seismically active. So in Oregon, we don't have a ton of earthquakes. There's a few every few years, but we're always expecting sort of a larger earthquake. So with the rocking wall, you have this core, and the wall, when there's an earthquake, actually rocks back and forth and then snaps back into place. Right? So it doesn't just break and stay crooked. Because the idea with the building codes is that you can get safely out of the building, but it doesn't mean the building is actually okay to use after that, right? The building is broken. But if you're using a post-tension rocking wall, and you can do this in other materials too, it actually allows the building to reset, and you're able to go in and repair a few things in the wall that actually allow you to use the building again. So that's really important in terms of sustainability, because it's kind of the ultimate resilience, where your building isn't garbage once you've had a seismic event. So we've been in this process for a long time, and this is what we did many years ago, was the 2-story rocking wall test, and we've since done a 10-story as well, but we're gonna go ahead and play that just so you kind of see the shaking that we do to the structures. So your building can have that much movement in it and still not break. And actually the 10-story structure, which I'll show you here in a second, that's the 10-story. They actually put like plates and cups and, you know, kind of set up a dinner table in it, and the only thing that fell off was like a candle holder, like rolled off. But everything else was still there, nothing broke. It's pretty incredible. You can see there's windows and wall assemblies down at the base, but not up top. And so everyone was really excited about this. It was kind of like a space shuttle launch or something. Everyone got so into it. They were like cheering at the bottom. There's a lot of wood nerds, but we love wood nerds. And all the engineers were there because this has been work of a whole consortium of a lot of organizations working on this for a long time, and lever drawing through with the engineer to figure out exactly what we wanted to test. So the other things that we did with all of the money that came from that competition are doing all of these tests, right? So we did fire tests and we did structural tests on all of these different elements, so that it was proven that these assemblies worked and could go into the IBC, right? So it takes a lot of money to do all these kinds of tests. You have to do the burn rate test, and you it's in a box and it's burning for hours, and you watch it. And then the really fun ones, though, are the structural tests, where they're actually just loading the pieces of structure until they crack in a really dramatic and exciting way. Everybody loves to see those things crack. So that's Eric from Hyoun, and he's there watching some parts of that crack. So, Outlining Art is the next project. This was actually sort of all in the same time. This is when we came up with this idea, forest to frame. And that's really when you're thinking of exactly where did all these materials come from and how did we get them into the building, all the steps along the way. The reason that's really important for us, especially in timber country, is because there's a real divide between rural and urban economies. There's not a lot of money in the rural economies. All the money is kind of in the cities. And if we're helping to really push forward our timber industries and make them kind of come back, it means that there's a lot more money in those towns, right? So there's more money for libraries and schools, and there's more money for people to sort of prosper in their small towns. And so really you hear from the source, where did you get that tree? How was it managed? Who managed it? How many times was it touched and by whom? Was any of that money going to minority or women-owned businesses, any tribal enterprises, any other kinds of organizations that you'd like to support? Who is milling it? Who's actually turning it into a piece of mass timber, so from a log to like a glulam? And then how do you get it into the building? Who's actually assembled the building? Who's put it together? And who's engineered it? So all of these things are important. These are all things that we think about all the time. So this is kind of that virtuous cycle that you think about, and how we're actually putting money into the rural economies by making sure that we know exactly where we're getting wood from, right? So we're not specifying wood that's, you know, from a Brazilian rainforest. We're specifying wood that's dug fir that actually comes from close by. So this is Outlining Art. This is the first building in the U.S. to be made with domestically produced CLT. So that means that all the trees came from Oregon, it was milled in Oregon, it was pressed into panels in Oregon, and then this is our office in Portland. So this is where we work. And it's just really open space. Like a lot of mass timber buildings you see, it's intentionally very clean inside so that you get the enjoyment of seeing the wood itself, because it's a nice material to look at. It's very warm. That's our CLT stair, which will always do a beautiful fire stair that is still wood. And then in this image here, you see one of the last panels going down on the top floor, and that's from the forest that you see in the distance near Mount Hood. The Nature Conservancy is a lot of different things. So the Nature Conservancy is not only a rehab project for the Oregon Conservation Center, so they are a land conservancy, so they buy land and then they keep it undeveloped and they figure out how to manage resources on it. So this is what their building looked like before, and even though they've been in Portland for 30 years, it seemed like no one knew that they were there because they were kind of a, you know, nondescript building. So it was redesigned, we pulled off all of the skin of the building and then built a new pavilion in the front. So we're reusing a building. We just stripped out a lot of the things that made this space kind of claustrophobic, and then reclad it in some leather and steel. And then the pavilion in front you see is actually made from CLT, from FSC certified CLT in this instance. And again, that material was coming off of their lands as part of the restoration project. So the other big thing on here is, it's got this really beautiful entryway to the building that's sort of all of these boulders that were specially selected in this decomposed granite path that gets you up to the doorway. It's very kind of natural while being in the city. But you'll see that the wood cladding back there, that is actually juniper. So it's Oregon juniper. And again, this comes from one of the Nature Conservancy's pieces of land that they're conserving. And what you see is that in different parts of the building, we've sort of likened it to one of the areas that the Nature Conservancy is working in, either a rehab project or some area in Oregon that's very special to them. So this is the 9-ply CLT that we use as the ceiling and the structure. And on top of that is a really intense green roof that has all of these trees from Oregon growing in it. And that's the space kind of at the end that looks like it's their convening space. But if you look at that juniper, what's really interesting about that is juniper is a native species to Oregon, grows in eastern Oregon, but because of fire suppression that's been happening for 50 years, like Simon said, we've been in net growth because we've been protecting the forests by stopping the wildfires all the time. But because of fire suppression, we get these really intense fires, right? And that fire suppression has actually kept the low-growing sagebrush from growing a lot, but has allowed the junipers to grow in sort of big areas and big clumps that don't end up getting touched by the wildfire, but the sagebrush gets burned out. So the juniper actually sucks out so much groundwater that by just cladding this building, the exterior of the building in juniper, it actually saves 750,000 gallons of water that are not getting sucked out of the aquifer and are remaining in the land so that the sagebrush actually has a chance to grow. And this is what it looks like. You're supposed to have big areas of sagebrush, but right now what we see are big forested areas of juniper. So finding a market for juniper was a really cool way of being part of a restoration project that the Nature Conservancy does. So all of these things are really tied together. You can think about all the things that you care about, and in some way they can be applied to what you're doing in architecture. So it looks like that, but it's supposed to look like this, so that these little sage grouse can actually live and have great habitats. And the sage grouse themselves, they're endangered, and they have this really fancy dance that they do. It's a mating dance, and I think it's so cute that I always like to look at it, and that's what they do. I love them. So Adidas North America is another project that's in Portland. We do a lot of work all around the country, but this is specifically Portland projects right now. Adidas North America, this is their headquarters. And what you see there is a really big giant campus, and we did a couple of new buildings for them, the two sort of in the foreground there. So one is an office building, and then one is an employee amenities building. And the really interesting thing about this is that this is really about structural innovation and a new kind of structural system. So what you see is that instead of just saying, hey, CLT, those are floors and roofs, and we put the panels on, we said, we're building parking on the lower structures, we're improving the parking that's there, and if you know anything about parking, which I'm sure you'll learn, they have this thing called concrete double T's, right? So we decided to make CLT double T's. So it's really the same kind of structure, but it's made of a new material. Something where you would have used concrete, you're now using wood. And we just said, hey, why not? Does that work, engineer? And the engineer says, cool. So we go ahead, and it's really all about this partnership with the engineer and saying, this is what we'd like to do. Is that something that makes sense? And they'll say, well, not that, but maybe this. And they make some edits to it so that we can go forward. So CLT double T's. And you kind of see how those are all stacked together, but what it means is it makes construction so fast because these are all prefab. They just come on a truck, all the CLT double T's, you pick them up, you drop them in place, and the project saves a lot of time, so like 3 months in construction. But the other part of it that's really cool and really beautiful is this concrete corbelled structure. So right here you're seeing the beams that have all these perforations in them, and then there you're seeing CLT double T's getting stacked on top, and then building skin. And we like to, you'll see that on one side there, you'll see the CLT double T sitting on the corbelled structure. So it's concrete with all of these holes so that HVAC and electrical can go through and you don't have to perforate any beams. But what's really amazing about this system is it's just a gravity fit. So you have the beam, and you have the CLT double T, and it kind of sits right inside of it, and then there's no additional fasteners right there, because there's already a notch that's been created to capture the wood. So, I mean, think about that. It's a gravity fit. I'm saying it again. It's a gravity fit. You're not then fastening that CLT double T, those beams, into the beams going one way, into the beams going the other way. There's a notch, it's sized just right, it fits right in there, and it's a gravity fit. Like, so when I graduated from school, I don't think I knew that you could do that, right? I think it's pretty exciting to be able to experiment with some of these things. We always like to make full-size mock-ups whenever we can. I mean, these things are expensive, right? It's like $250,000 in full-size mock-ups, but when you make a full-size mock-up, you know exactly what you're gonna get, and you know that the builders are going to build it the way that you expect it to. So here's that in construction, and here's that space on the interior, right? So you see that corbelled concrete, you see where the CLT double T's just sit inside of it, and you see all those perforations for the HVAC, right? It's really beautiful inside, and again, you're getting to experience that wood on the interior. And again, a CLT stair, and we like to do Doug fir because we're in timber country, and Douglas fir is our kind of main tree that we use for construction. Again, some interior shots of that space. They're so beautiful because of the wood and because the ceiling is kept super clean because of the corbelled structure. And then there's a soccer pitch in between the two buildings, and there's parking underneath all of it together. So that's the employee amenity building. It's like workout space and juice bar. And that has an entirely different kind of structure because we like to just try out different kinds of structures and see which ones are really efficient. So this starts to talk about how those things are put together. You'll see those two pieces, and there's sort of not really a knife plate, but a plate that goes in between them, and then they kind of sandwich together on the outside. So that's what you see on the inside of the space. All the structure is really exposed and really grand and really beautiful. Myron Memorial Trust is a project that I worked on. Now it's been a few years. It was during COVID. Construction was finishing. They didn't move in for a really long time. But this project is really incredible because the client really wanted to have an equity focus. So their mission really drove everything we did on here. And there's a beautiful garden in the back. This used to be a parking lot, and it had all dead cars. It was like a tow yard, right? And that tow yard had a really beautiful view of the city, which now is a garden. And if you look at this building, this is where the first time that we used mass plywood on a building. We built several pavilions out of it before to kind of showcase what that material does. But mass plywood is a product, it's a structural product, it's not the same orientation as regular plywood. The lamellas are in a different series of layers. So it's been tested, it's a structural product, it's only made in Oregon by one company. So again, we're trying to invest in innovation in whatever markets we're working in. So wherever we are in the country, we're like, what are people doing really well here? What are they excelling at? What do they specialize in? What kind of materials do they have at the ready? And how can we make that fit with this building? So what you see on there is those mullions are the structural mullions for the curtain wall, and those are mass plywood. And then the whole deck and roof are mass plywood in this space. Going back. So this is what that looked like in construction. This is their convening space. These are 3-foot deep beams and columns, and they're oversized for aesthetics. They didn't have to be that deep. They weren't holding that much load, but again, you just kind of proportion it so that it looks kind of right to you. So they're deeper than they need to be, but then this is the finished space, right? So it's a great instance of using an industrial material, but making it into a really refined space, right? And by sanding it, by adding a little bit of white tint to it to take a little bit of the orange out, you can use materials that are really humble, that are really natural, and still create something that feels really refined, really high-end, really fancy. So this is their kind of premier meeting space. And then this is kind of in construction, so we had them down in the factory. Again, that factory is like 60 miles from Portland from the job site. We had them put on a temporary roofing so that when we brought it up to the site, because it's raining all the time, the wood would be a little bit more protected because you're always dealing with that. Equity was really important to the client, and so thinking about what are all the best spaces in the building. The roof deck, the corner spaces, all of those are meant for kind of all the employees to use rather than like the C-suite people, the CEOs. All of these were kind of dedicated to the slightly more public spaces. So you'll see that this is the lunchroom, and then there's a green roof outside and a roof deck, and that's what's over that massive plywood pavilion. So we have a wet, drippy roof deck, a lot of plants over wood, and that's because you just really detail it super well, so it's very tight, and then you put in leak detection so that you know if there's a leak in any one place, you can address it before it starts to stain the wood. But in thinking about equity, you know, you look at these spaces, and it's not just about all the people who worked on the project and making sure that you're representing the community that you're building in, but it's also about level of mobility, it's about body size. So when you do furniture selection, you make sure that you're selecting furniture that fits all types of different bodies. Some people like arms on the chairs because they have back problems and it helps them push themselves out of the chair. But you can imagine a person with a bigger body does not want the arms on the chair because it really pinches your hips, right? So you have to have a lot of different kinds of furniture in these spaces. And it's just really a way for you all to start thinking about equity. Equity means a lot of different things. And it's really important to have spaces where if you're gonna be working there all day, that you're comfortable and you feel like every space you go into has been designed for you. You're not making yourself smaller, you're not making yourself quieter in order to be out in the world, but you're able to be who you are and be comfortable. And we have an impact on that in how we design. This has got solar panels, so it actually generates enough electricity for the building to run without the plug loads, so not the loads of the computers, but yes, the lights and all the HVAC are running there. And what we did that was really interesting, I think, was this is the first time that we created a specialized sustainable wood sourcing criteria. So some of the things I say are, you know, it's really good to just make your own rules about things and make definitions for yourself about what you want, because a lot of people can tell you what sustainable wood is, right? But for Meyer Memorial Trust, the things that they're most focused on were equity, sustainability, innovation, and community. And so they wanted to make sure that they were doing everything possible in the building to support that mission, right? So what we did was we created a set of criteria with them so that all of the wood that we were getting could somehow meet that mission. And number one, what they wanted was wood that came from a minority and women-owned business or a tribal enterprise, or something that was coming from a place where they knew enough about the way the forest was managed. They weren't requiring that there was any certification. It was just, it's in Oregon, we know the family that runs it, we've heard about their practices and how they manage the forest, and we feel like that is a good sustainability goal. It wasn't a requirement for it to be SFI or FSC or anything like that. It was just, hey, what are they doing and how can we support them? If nothing like that was available, then they said, okay, in this case, we might look for something that does have a third-party certification, but more importantly, it just needs to come from Oregon or the Pacific Northwest. Really, the goal was to not get anything outside of the country. Canada was okay, because the Pacific Northwest really does include Canada, because it's a border, but the forests go across the border, and they're the same, right, the same trees. And so that was kind of the third priority. So what we did was say, okay, we're looking for all of these things, and if there is up to a 15% premium, we're just gonna go ahead and take it. If the premium is more than 15%, then we'll sit down with the client and say, do you wanna pay for this or not? Here are your choices. Here's something that's, you know, by our criteria, more sustainable than this other one. And our conversations might be something like, okay, well, where is that? Are we talking about trusses? Trusses are in the attic, it's not an occupied space, no one's ever gonna see them. But if we're talking about glue lamps that are exposed, we want to be able to go through the building and be able to tell the story of where all these things came from. And pointing to something that they can't see is a lot harder than saying, like, that beam right there, we know exactly the forest that it came from, and the people who manage it, and the people who milled it, and the people who turned it into a glue lamp, right? So they can make those kind of decisions. So we kind of split up the responsibility of making the decisions of what was sustainable and what we were going to pay for. And this was really the first time that we did that. We worked with a company called Sustainable Northwest because they know all the places that you can get wood, and they know a lot of the folks who actually they're getting the wood from. And so working really closely with them was how we were able to do this. Now we've used this as a model for all of our other projects where we're using wood, is just to say what's available, what are the client's priorities, and how can we get sustainability into that. But it's also been used on a lot of other projects, like the Portland Airport has this giant, gorgeous wood ceiling, and it's all of that wood is coming from tribal enterprises, and the same kind of process is what was used on that. So again, it's something where we're impacting the industry, we're impacting the way people are doing things just by trying to think of like, hey, what's a better way we can do this? What are some constraints we can take off so that we really meet our goals without having to follow someone else's rules? So the sustainable wood package was only $750,000. It's a pretty small building, but the premium overall was only 3% to get sustainable wood with our definition of sustainability. And 85% of the wood on the project ended up being sustainable wood. Equity, like I said, was also really important. So most of the scopes of the project were done by minority and women-owned small businesses. And that included the design teams, so our engineers were women-owned engineering teams, and really that went all the way up, right? Michelle DePass, she's in the middle in the red pants, she's the CEO of Meyer, and then I'm standing right next to her, but it was really important for her to have the entire design team really represent the community, and so myself as the lead architect and the PM on the project and the developer were women of color, and we worked with a minority-owned contractor firm. So, I mean, I say all these things because there's so much that you can do. There's so much impact that you can actually have as just an architect, just as a person working in your firm. You don't realize that, but if you can encourage people to say, like, you don't have to do all the things that Meyer did, because Meyer is a really ambitious project. But you can do one thing. You can pick one consultant who you haven't worked with before, or convince the contractor to pick a subcontractor who's maybe doing the siding that they haven't worked before, but just advocate for little changes because those all add up to something big, right? So all of those changes that we did meant that all of the materials were coming from really close by the site. So the money that we were generating was going back into our own economy, back into the rural economies, and really impacted the state. This is one of the last projects. This is creative office for a really big tech company up in Kirkland, Washington. So this again was a really cool project where we wanted to do a timber diagrid system. And just like I showed you before, and all the sort of fire testing and structural testing that had to be done, whenever you come up with something new like this timber diagrid, you have to go through performance-based testing, right? Because none of the jurisdictions, none of the people who sign off on the permits have seen this before, so they don't know that it's going to work in terms of loads and wind loads, and gravity loads and fire performance. They don't know that. And so the only way that you can get them to say, okay, yes, this is a viable system, is by actually doing this performance-based design, and that costs money. Just like I said, we spent $1 million on one part of framework, and since then we've done a lot of other testing, and other millions of dollars have gone into that, but it's because we're always applying for grants through the USDA in order to fund this kind of research that we do. So this is a really beautiful building, a big tech company. They obviously have a lot of money and were able to pay for this performance testing. But you'll kind of see inside there the diagrid system, and there's these big V cassettes. And so just like in the Adidas project, where we talked about making a corbelled concrete beam for all the HVAC to go through, instead we've created this V cassette in the structure that allows all of the HVAC and electrical to run inside of that and to act as a plenum, so it's blowing air out of the sides. So again, a bunch of details we don't really need to get into, but this is that diamond system, and that's so that we're removing as much of the structure on the interior as possible to make really great spaces on the interior. We like to build giant models of them to really look at what they're going to be, digital and physical models. And then we also build the actual full-size physical model that then will get tested. So we're just going to flip through a few of these until we get there. So again, that acts as the plenum so that you're actually getting airflow through there. And that's the experience of the interior of the space, these really big V columns. And then this is mock-ups, so just a small section to see what they look like. And then, there we go. Might have to fast But it's very exciting when you're actually there. And you actually get to see this thing that's been built, and it's a detail of a giant building, and they're just crushing it, and then it cracks, and you see what the limits are, right? I mean, this is really exciting stuff that you are doing in school and you're thinking about, and they're asking you to, maybe work with the engineering teams and figure out like what the limits are and what you can actually build. But this is also stuff that you can do in practice if you're kind of looking for ways to push things forward, right? And again, these are things that I'm really excited about. I'm really excited about equity. I'm really excited about sustainability. I'm really excited about finding what we're doing where we are and making the best of that, and not saying, hey, these skylights are beautiful, but they come from Denmark and I'm gonna order them anyway, but instead saying, hey, what's 20 miles from here? Can this person make a skylight? They have all the parts, right? What can you do that's already close to you? I mean, yes, stuff from overseas is great, beautifully designed, but you're all designers, and you can design beautifully, and you can have that stuff made by people that you know, or people that are close to you in your own neighborhoods. This diagrid has a concrete node. So again, the diagrid it has to perform seismically, right? So it has to flex a little bit. And so originally we had some rubber in there to allow a little bit of that flex. But again, this is a new system. We didn't know what was really gonna work. So we tried out a lot of different things, and what was required there was, it's got a lot of steel on the inside, but the concrete on the outside will be allowed to crack and can be fixed and replaced later. So that's the precast node for that diagrid system. So it's the last project, but I want to talk a little bit about what is next. Oh, I've been talking so fast, I didn't take up as much time as I thought. We're doing a lot of interesting things right now. So we have a project in Portland, Maine, Portland, and that is for the Portland Museum of Art. And we're designing a new addition and campus unification for them. And so what we're tracking right now is actually trying to help revive the timber industry in Maine, because just like Oregon, that's timber country. I think like 98% of Maine is covered in forests, but they used to have a lot of paper mills. And as we just needed fewer and fewer paper mills, those things have closed down, which means that there's no money coming into the small towns. And if you lived in a small town and like your grandparents worked in a paper mill, there's no more paper mill for you to work in, right? So maybe you love your town and you want to stay there, but there's not really any jobs. And so again, that's thinking about the rural and urban differences, and how if we pour money into those places, people can either maintain the way of life that they were wanting to have, or they can build new ways of life, right? So we're thinking about, there's an image right there at the top that's one of the paper mills, and about how to turn those into potentially mass timber manufacturing plants. And these are sort of long-term, but through connections with all of the legislators, there's actually been a big push to start putting money back into that, and so that it's possible in a number of years, maybe 5 years, that people can actually start building with CLT, with glulam that are actually made from Maine wood in Maine, because that's available, but not from Maine wood. But they have a ton of wood, so why wouldn't they be using it? And there's a lot of tribal enterprises, excuse me, that are actually managing forests. And so if you think about that, it's like, well, great. The folks, the indigenous folks, have a way of life that already really supports sustainability, is really respectful of the land, and they will have a way of managing the forest that's already super sustainable, and wouldn't then make me think I would also want them to be certified in some other way, and just say, no, I just want wood that comes from there. So thinking about that, then there's that sort of little colorful diagram. That is a community investment plan for Lower Albina, which is in Portland. And pretty much every city in the country, there's a story where there was a black or immigrant neighborhood, and that's where they put the freeway through. So they cut the neighborhoods in half often. They displace people, people are moved out of there. They say, oh, it's blighted, so we're gonna use that space. It's not blighted, it's just that there are brown people there. And that has happened historically all across America. So Lower Albina is Lower Albina because the freeway came in and cut it off from what's now Upper Albina, but it was one Albina. So there's a big push to reinvest in Albina and to create this new place to allow people to come back and have education and entertainment and tech hubs and lots of different kinds of housing. And I'd first project in this albino community investment plan. It's called Albino One. It's affordable housing, but this is a 96-acre plan. So what I'm doing now is trying to figure out who are all of the Black-owned and managed forests, who are folks who are milling products, who are folks who we can get to start manufacturing mass timber out of those products that have been milled, so that as this neighborhood is recreated, there are possibilities for more Black businesses to be involved, right? And not just those that are in Portland, because we're not a super big city, but coming from other places if necessary, so that we can start to really make sure that there's equity in terms of who has access to this new technology and who gets to benefit from its boom, right? We need to make sure that it's not just all of the big players that were there before, but if there are small players that we can connect with, we really want to, so we can start to reimagine what that is, right? And there's a long history in Oregon of Black loggers and Black foresters, and so that's kind of the next research project that I'm working on, because this is a long, 50-year timeline for this community investment plan. Definitely will live 50 more years, so why not? I'm not very young, so I'm not going to live 50 more years. And then the other things in Maine, there's also a company that's making wood insulation. So it's chipped wood and it's bloated insulation. So there's another way of using timber. And then biochar is another way of being able to produce energy using timber residual. So there's a lot of really interesting things going on in timber in terms of research and in practice. And I hope that you all understand that, yes, you are going to have to draw a lot of toilets and parking garages as new designers, but you're also going to have a really big impact on sustainability and equity and all the things that you care about. So again, like Simon said, be yourselves and maintain what's really important to you so that you can have the impact on the world that you really want to. Thanks. No pressure, because it's been a long conference, and I'm sure you're all excited to do something. Yeah, go ahead.
How did you get into timber? Like, what brought you into that as a design solution? I know a lot of firms are doing it. What specifically called you to it?
Well, in Oregon, we are timber country, right? So growing up, and I'm from Oregon, right? I grew up in Oregon. I actually went to the BAC, Boston Architectural Center, so you guys over there. Yes, love it, love it. Hardest school in the nation, legit, real hard. So I grew up in Oregon, and so I always say about Oregonians, like, we're already naturally inclined to think about that, because we're like the first recycling and composting programs in the nation. It's already sort of like, it's always been around, right? You're always thinking about the forest. But there's always been a battle, you probably don't remember, but there was like a whole spotted owl crisis where there's endangered animals that were living in areas that were set to be logged, right? So there was a big battle between all the loggers, them wanting to maintain their way of life and have a job, but also everyone else not wanting to destroy the habitat of the spotted owl. So I'm from Oregon, and that's why it feels very natural to me, but one of the first projects that I got to work on kind of all the way through was a mass timber project. It was very new. It was in 2016. It was only 5 stories, but it was the largest by area. It was like 160,000 square feet. And I was just so excited about it because it was a really different way of building, and I hadn't built that way before. And actually being on the ground and seeing how all the things came together. There's a thing, engineering judgments, EJs. We had to have a fire engineer write all of these judgments for very specific details. And I just learned so much about it and understood where it was coming from that I was just really excited about it and wanted to kind of continue. And that was actually before I came to Lever. And so once I finished that project, I came over to Lever to continue working on all of these other projects. So that's really what drew me to it. And also, I'm an architect. I kind of love, brutalist and concrete and like real smooth and clean stuff, but when you actually live and or work in a space that's made with timber, there's a huge difference. You're not touching this like freezing cold wall in the winter that never warms up because you're not in the building all day and the heat shuts off at night or whatever. But it's this experiential quality of it. I think that's really important. And then understanding now, after I've been doing it for a long time, what impact it can have on the communities that you're in. Yeah.
How do you advocate for using mass timber in projects? I know there's a lot of pushback, but maybe in the areas I'm from, where it's just not commonly used, so it's hard to get it to go forward.
Yeah, I think you advocate by understanding where it's going to come from and how it's going to get there. So if you can figure out, like, there's a train line, there's a rail, that's going to be really inexpensive to get it from where it is to where it's going. Sometimes it doesn't make sense, but if you're thinking about a client who, you know, really wants something to be sustainable, you can do the math on it and figure out, you know, how far you can transport something and still get the benefit of the carbon sequestration where you haven't burned it all up through transportation or something. You can also look at it in terms of equity, like if we get this wood from this place, even though it's not close, we are benefiting this indigenous community in a way that's really important, if that's something the client's interested in. You can get contractors on board because contractors are really excited about having an edge over, contractors are so good at marketing, and they're really excited about having an edge over other people. We want to have this experience in mass timber building so that we can, you know, bid on a job and say, like, look, we've done this before, we've done this gorgeous thing, we know how to do it, it goes really fast. So there's really a lot of benefits to it, but like I said, it doesn't always make sense. You kind of have to work through it and do math and decide, do you have a compelling story to say, you know, you really could do timber here and do a lot good. Anyone else? All right, thank you all very much.